Yesterday, Gregg Berhalter announced his first U.S. men's national team called up, and surprise, surprise, it's all MLS guy that is being called up for this January camp. I believe there's 26 or 27 guys that is being called up for this January camp. And before anyone kind of complain about why exactly we are calling all MLS guy, why couldn't we just get some of the guys that is currently playing overseas and are kind of considered regular for the past year in terms of this youth development the U.S. men's national team are trying to go through, is because this January camp is kind of like out of whack in terms of where the international break is. The next two games that the U.S. is going to be playing is not part of the international break, which means that most of those players that is currently playing in Europe will not be eligible to be in this team because their club probably won't let them go to join their national team to play a couple of meaningless games. So that is exactly why we are stuck with all MLS guys, because MLS right now is in the off season and most of these guys are using this time as a time to join the January camp, maybe getting ready for the new season, or maybe even crack into the U.S. men's national team. Most of the time, most of these guys that join the January camp, most of them come out of it not really being a starters or even come close to getting in the U.S. men's national team. And hence, that's why some of these names are very new. Some of these guys have never had a cap for the U.S. men's national team, and that this is probably the first time that they actually appear in the U.S. men's national team roster. But we start off with goalkeeper, and what I'm going to do is for every position, I'm going to be talking about guys that I think potentially could crack into the team, and guys that probably shouldn't be deserved to be in this camp in the first place, and also guys that probably should have been in this January camp and kind of got snubbed in terms of this roster. But first of all, we have for goalkeeper, we have Alex Bono, Sean Johnson, Tyler Miller, and Zach Steffen. Now, guys that I don't think deserve to be in the January camp out of the goalkeeper position, obviously it has to be Tyler Miller and Alex Bono. I mean, Bono this year has been very, very bad for Toronto. He pretty much just fall off a cliff of the performance that he had in the previous year when TFC won we won the MLS Cup, and that this year he was very, very sloppy. And that can said about Tyler Miller too, who was a backup goalkeeper for the Seattle Sounders and got traded to well, not traded, but LAFC picked him up in the expansion draft, and now all of a sudden he's with the U.S. men's national team. And it's not like Tyler Miller was absolutely dazzling when he was in LAFC. He did make a couple of crucial mistake, and at time he didn't look comfortable being the goalkeeper of that team. So that is certainly a bit of a surprising kind of factor that he is included in terms of the national team. And you know, guys that I think kind of got snubbed in the goalkeeper position, obviously Tim Melia. I mean, what else can that guy have to do in terms of getting into the national team? And I know some people say that, well, he's getting old and he has no national team experience. Well, give him an experience. Give him a chance in this January camp. He's been by far one of the most consistent and one of the best goalkeeper in MLS. And since we're going to call all MLS squad, to not even consider him is just, I just don't get it. Like, it is just almost a crime, the fact that Tim Melia did not make it to this squad when in previous year he clearly should have done it. And you know, again, in this January camp, the fact that he didn't make it is just ridiculous. And also other guys I think could have deserved it. Bill Hamid probably could have been in this roster. He had an amazing second half of the season when he came back to DC United. And maybe Stephen Fry should be deserved to be in the U.S. men's national team roster. I know he was born in Switzerland, but he obtained his American citizen, and I think last year he did join the U.S. men's national team January camp. So why not call him up again? I mean, this year he has a very similar kind of performance as the previous year, which is that he is very good, okay? And he also got snubbed in terms of the goalkeeper of the year award, in my opinion. But looking at defenders, oh, and guys that I think could potentially crack into the national team, well, obviously Zach Steffen, I think he is not going to only crack into that national team, but he's going to be our future starting goalkeeper. Maybe Sean Johnson could potentially crack into it, but right now I think Steffen definitely he will into the national team, and he's our future number one here. And then in terms of the defense, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 defenders that is called up for this January camp. So we have Reggie Cannon, Justin Glad, Greg Garza, Nick Lima, Aaron Long, Daniel Lovett, Mark McKenzie, Keegan Rosenberry, Austin Trusty, and Walker Zimmerman. Now, in terms of the guys that I don't think should belong in here, there isn't a lot that I would say out of this list that I don't think they deserve it. I think most of these defenders deserve to be getting called up. Maybe Nick Lima probably shouldn't deserve that. I mean, I know Lima, he was part of the worst team in MLS, and that I know he was really one of our only bright spot from that Quakes team last season. But it felt like last year, along with many of the Quakes players, his performance kind of took at least a little bit of dip. So I'm kind of surprised that he gets called up again in the January camp. And I think last year he also got called up in the January camp. And maybe Lovitz might be a guy that I might think that probably shouldn't have been called up. I mean, Lovitz, he was okay at Montreal, but he wasn't like spectacular, okay? And also Justin Glad, I think that probably is the guy that I would say that probably shouldn't be on this roster, considering the fact that Glad definitely did not have a good season last year. I mean, the 2 previous season that he was with RSL, he was spectacular, and there was a lot people talk about how he could potentially be part of that defensive core for the U.S. men's national team. And then last year at RSL, he was very bad. He took more than just one step back. He probably took 2 or 3 steps back from what he has done in the first 2 years, and the hype that surrounded him kind of now just died down after that bad season that he kind of had this past season. But guys that I think got snubbed, maybe Tim Parker probably should have been in this roster. But other than that, again, I think I have no problem with most of these guys in the January camp. It's not like as obvious as what the goalkeeper situation of how I have no idea how does Bono and Miller gets into this roster, considering the fact that both of them either have bad or at best mediocre kind of year. And then in terms of the midfield, you got Kellen Acosta, Paul Arriola, Corey Bear, Michael Bradley. Yes, I honestly, what does this guy needs to do worse to not be picked in the U.S. men's national team roster? Like, seriously, how is he still getting called ups even though we know he is absolutely shit? I mean, and I know it's just the January camp roster and probably this is just for experience, but if you're going to get a guy of experience, do not get a guy that it's been proven in the past of how he is nothing but failure. I mean, it's ridiculous, the fact that Bradley is in this. And then we got Marky Delgado, Sebastian Leggett, Russell Canals. Not even going to pronounce his first name because I have no idea how you pronounce, but Milihojevic, if I pronounce that last name right too. And then you got Christian Rodon and Will Trapp. And guys that are probably shouldn't be belong in this list, like I said, prime target, Michael Bradley. How is he still in this team? I mean, and another guy that I would also say that probably shouldn't belong here, Will Trapp. I made a rant about him and talk about how I don't want to see him ever again come close to the men's national team, even though I know the reason why Will Trapp is being picked is because that's Gregg Berhalter's guy. He was with that Columbus team where Gregg Berhalter was managing for the last couple of years, and he was absolutely awful in terms of those friendlies from last season. But besides those two guys, I wouldn't say most of these guys kind of deserve to get called up in terms of this January camp roster, and in terms of guys that I think kind of got snubbed. Tyler Adams probably could have been in this, although I think Adams is already with RB Leipzig, and since he's with that team now, RB Leipzig is probably not going to let him go to join the national team for this January camp, like most of those guys that is currently playing overseas. And Sean Davis is another name that probably should have been in on this list. I mean, he was one of the vital part alongside with Tyler Adams for that midfield for the Red Bulls last season, and kind of surprised he didn't get a call up. Now, in terms of guys that maybe could break into the national team, obviously I think Kellen Acosta could potentially get into it. Paul Arriola definitely had experience with the national team. I think I'm not quite sure if this is correct, but I believe he was on the roster for the World Cup back in 2014. So he definitely have some experience in terms of being a U.S. men's national team veteran. So I think he'll definitely crack the spot. Delgado might be in there. I mean, Delgado was kind of part of the roster of that youth movement that we had last season, so maybe he could be called up. And Rodon is another guy that probably could be called up. I think he was with the Gold Cup roster about back in 2017, so maybe he might called up. And of course, Will Trapp. Unfortunately, as much as I hated him and I don't want him any part of the national team, because Gregg Berhalter is managing this team, he's most likely going to pick his favorite guys from the crew and probably put them in the roster no matter how bad they are. So, yeah. And then finally, in the forward position, there's only 3 forward that Gregg Berhalter actually chose, and that, of course, is Jeremy Abobasi, Christian Ramirez, and Jerzy Zardes. And guys that I don't think should belong in this roster has to be Christian Ramirez and Jerzy Zardes. Ramirez wasn't even a starter for LAFC, so how in the world does he get cracked into the U.S. men's national team? And I know in the past I've been saying, and many U.S. men's national team fans been saying, that Christian Ramirez should at least get a look or two, because he's been scoring a ton of goals for a Minnesota team that is not very good. And, this season he had a pretty good start with Minnesota as usual, but when he was with LAFC, he didn't get tremendous amount of game time, and like I said, he wasn't a starter for that team. So, yeah, if you're not a starter for an MLS club, you probably shouldn't be belonging in the January camp roster. And then, when you look at all 3 of these guys and who do I think probably could belong in the U.S. men's national team, yeah, I don't know. I don't think all 3 of these guys are part of the future. Maybe Abobasi could potentially break in that. I mean, there's been a lot of hype surrounding Jeremy Abobasi and what he did with the Timbers in the second half of the season. But, the question is, can he continue with that Timbers team? And from what I saw with Jeremy Abobasi in the playoffs, he was not very good. Okay, he had a good spell in the second half of the season, but when playoff time come and when the curtain draw, he kind of fell under the pressure. So I just wonder, with him being in the men's national team, and I know he is still very young, and the fact that I shouldn't just say that he will just fall under the pressure if he joined the U.S. men's national team and crack into that spot, but he needs to learn to not fall under the pressure, and he's gonna learn that as he gets older. And as I said, I think this is only his first year with the Timbers, and he is very, very young. But other than that, I don't think Ramirez is gonna crack into it. I think he's almost near the end of his prime, and usually when that happens, yeah, say goodbye to your chance of joining the U.S. men's national team. And Jerzy Zardes, same thing. Zardes, he used to be a guy that were hyped up so much and said that he could be one of the best striker in our near future, and it turns out that was not the case. I mean, he was pretty bad after a couple of years, and after he kind of got hyped up, and he just one of those guys that never live up to its potential. So I don't think Jersey Zardes is going to be part of the future. And in terms of guys that I think kind of got snubbed in the striker position, I mean, there isn't a lot of names that I can think of that could be a striker for the U.S. men's national team in this January camp. Maybe, yeah, I can't really think of it on top of my head who exactly could belong in that forward position. That, and this is probably the reason why there's only 3 strikers, because most of our strikers are either playing overseas or we just don't have a reliable one, and that's been a big problem for this team last season, is that they just don't really have a striker that can finish, and also, most importantly, they don't have creativity whatsoever. That team last season was just bunkering for the whole season, and then hopefully we can hit teams on the counterattack, which most of the time it was very ineffective, and that is why we had so many low-scoring games, and it was so boring watching the U.S. men's national team play whenever they play in a friendly or even in a competitive match. But yeah, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all of this? Oh, and now I thought about who probably should have been here. Dom Dwyer. He was with this team a year ago, and he was part of that Gold Cup roster, and he looked okay with the men's national team and looked okay in that roster, but I think they probably could have given him another chance and put him in this roster, and that he does have that experience with this team before, so he can, of course, give his experience to Ramirez or Abobasi, 2 guys that are pretty new to the U.S. men's national team. But I think maybe that's why they decided to put Jersey Zardes in there, because Zardes also have experience, and he'll probably explain to these 2 guys how things will work and what is it like to play for the national team. So yeah, that is pretty much it for my kind of reaction to the U.S. men's national team. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? And also, because Gregg Berhalter decided to go with an all-MLS roster, I'm now 100% sure I'm not attending that Costa Rica match at Avaya Stadium. Like, what is the point of watching an all-MLS squad? And it's basically, those 2 games are kind of like trial runs for most of these guys, that there's just no point going to the game. There's no point paying $40 or $50, and I know the tickets are cheaper than what I expected, but still, this is just a trial run for most of these guys, and those 2 games are just kind of like a trial run. So what is the point of watching your national team play when they're putting a lot of guys that is just currently on trial with the team, and it's a meaningless match, and that you won't see some of the guys that could be part of the future for this team? And yeah, there's just no point of actually going to it. So yeah, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this? And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button, and yeah, I will see you guys next time.